400 feet beneath the Sea of Okhotsk, American Navy divers moved through black water toward a Soviet military cable. There were no guards standing beside it, no minefield, no steel vault, just a thick line resting in the mud. Yet if the men approaching it were discovered, Moscow would have proof that a United States submarine had penetrated one of the Soviet Union's most sensitive maritime sanctuaries. Above them, USS Halibut held close to the seabed. Every pump, valve, and unsecured tool was a liability. A metallic impact could travel through the water. A sudden mechanical failure could force the submarine to surface inside a region watched by Soviet aircraft, warships, and listening systems. The divers were not there to cut the cable. They were there to make it betray every person speaking through it. The mission became known as Operation Ivy Bells. Beginning in the early 1970s, it gave American intelligence extraordinary access to Soviet naval communications. It also exposed a darker rule of espionage. The most advanced security system in the world can still be destroyed by one trusted man with a price. And the weakness Ivy Bells exploited did not disappear with the Cold War. It now lies beneath nearly every international message, financial transfer, and cloud connection on Earth. The Sea of Okhotsk is enclosed by the Russian Far East, the Kamchatka Peninsula, Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands. During the Cold War, Moscow treated it as a protected military backyard. The geography narrowed the approaches. Soviet forces patrolled the region. Strategic submarines operated from bases along its edge. Across the seabed ran a communications cable linking the Pacific Fleet headquarters at Vladivostok with the submarine base at Petropavlovsk on Kamchatka. Through that cable passed the ordinary nervous system of a navy. Maintenance reports, readiness updates, deployment discussions, technical problems, and conversations between senior officers. None of those fragments needed to contain a declaration of war. A delayed repair could reveal that a submarine was unavailable. A change in routine could signal an approaching patrol. A complaint about equipment could expose a weakness that no Soviet commander would ever place in a public report. The cable was valuable because the Soviets believed it was safe. American planners understood the paradox. Communications sent through radio might be intercepted, so sensitive traffic was more likely to be encrypted. A cable buried inside a heavily defended sea felt different. Physical access seemed impossible. That confidence reportedly led Soviet personnel to pass at least some traffic with less protection than American analysts expected. The United States did not need to defeat a cipher if it could place a silent ear against the wire. But first, it had to find the wire. The search area was enormous. The cable could disappear beneath silt, cross uneven terrain, or vanish into miles of featureless mud. Satellite navigation did not yet offer a submarine the precise underwater positioning available today. Charts could provide a route, but not the exact location of a dark line at depth. The Navy needed a vessel capable of creeping along the bottom, examining the seabed, and placing divers outside without announcing its presence. USS Halibut had not been built for that mission. She entered service as a nuclear-powered guided missile submarine designed to carry Regulus cruise missiles. Newer ballistic missile submarines soon made that role obsolete. Instead of retiring Halibut, the Navy rebuilt her for a form of underwater intelligence work the public did not know existed. Engineers added equipment for deep ocean search and close maneuvering. Cameras and sonar allowed the crew to study the bottom. Her former missile spaces became work areas for technicians and intelligence specialists. A remotely operated search vehicle, nicknamed the Fish, could move beyond the hull and photograph objects in darkness. Halibut had already proved that she could find what others could not. In 1968, she located the wreck of the Soviet submarine K-129 deep in the Pacific, after the Soviet search had failed. Now, Commander John Jack McNish and his crew were being asked to use the same patience inside waters where being found could be as dangerous as finding nothing. The breakthrough began with a simple observation. No matter how secret the cable was, Soviet authorities still had to protect it from anchors and fishing gear near the coast. A trawler could tear apart in seconds what engineers had taken months to install. Widely repeated accounts credit American planners with searching the Kamchatka shoreline for warnings telling vessels where not to anchor. The logic was almost insulting in its simplicity. A sign intended to protect the secret might also point directly toward it. Halibut slipped into the Sea of Okhotsk in 1971 and searched the coast. The crew reportedly found the expected warning markers. They now had a starting point, but not the cable itself. A line beginning near shore could curve, sink into sediment, or disappear beyond the range of the cameras. The submarine began a slow search pattern. Hour after hour, the Fish returned images of rocks, mud, debris, and empty water. Inside Halibut, the crew lived under a discipline that turned small noises into threats. Tools were secured. Machinery was monitored. Men listened to the hull and wondered whether an unfamiliar sound came from their own submarine or from something hunting outside it. Then a shape appeared across the seabed. It was too straight to be natural. In places, the line lay exposed. In others, it slipped beneath the silt and reappeared farther ahead. After searching an underwater wilderness, Halibut had found the cable connecting Soviet Naval Command to one of its most important submarine bases. Finding it did not make the mission safe. It only brought the submarine close enough to fail in a more dangerous way. Halibut had to settle near the bottom and place divers in the water. At that depth, cold, pressure, and time worked against the human body. The divers operated from a pressurized system and used specialized breathing mixtures. Their umbilicals carried gas, communications, and support from the submarine. If a line snagged, a heating system failed, or disturbed mud erased visibility, the men could not simply swim hundreds of feet to the surface. Their world ended at the edge of a helmet lamp. They reached the cable and cleared enough sediment to work. Cutting into it was never an option. A sudden loss of service would bring Soviet repair crews to the site and reveal that the cable had been touched. The device had to collect the signal while leaving the outer covering intact. The solution was electromagnetic induction. Electrical signals traveling through the cable produced a field around it. A sensor placed outside the insulation could detect that field without piercing the line. The principle was elegant. Making it work for months under cold salt water and crushing pressure was not. Public accounts differ on some dimensions of the early equipment, but they agree on the essential design. A large, non-piercing tap that could be installed around the cable, record multiple conversations, and be serviced during later submarine missions. More advanced versions were built to separate from the cable rather than break it if Soviet crews lifted the line. The divers guided the device into place. Their gloves reduced dexterity. The current pressed against their bodies. Every movement stirred silt through the beams of their lamps. Above them waited a submarine whose survival depended on remaining quiet. There was no explosion when the mission succeeded. No signal flare, no victory message. Just a recorder beside a cable on the ocean floor. The divers returned to Halibut. The submarine recovered its equipment, eased away from the bottom, and began the long passage out of the Soviet sanctuary. Only after the recordings reached the National Security Agency could anyone know whether the device had captured usable intelligence. It had. The first recovered material gave analysts something more valuable than a single spectacular secret. It gave them routine. Soviet naval personnel discussed operations, repairs, command problems, schedules, and technical concerns. Analysts could compare one conversation with another, then place those fragments beside satellite images, intercepted radio traffic, and observed submarine movements. A sentence that meant little alone could become decisive when matched with a change at a pier thousands of miles away. That is how intelligence often works, not as revelation, but accumulation. American submarines returned to recover recordings and service the tap. USS Seawolf and USS Parch later joined missions of this kind. Each voyage repeated the same chain of risk. Enter the guarded sea, relocate the cable, place men outside the hull, retrieve the material, and leave without creating evidence that the submarine had ever been there. The sailors could not tell their families what they had done. Many people aboard knew only the part of the mission required for their jobs. A patrol could reshape Washington's understanding of Soviet naval readiness, then disappear behind a cover story when the crew came home. For years, Soviet patrols, geography, and sonar failed to stop Ivy Bells. The operation was finally defeated in Washington. Ronald Pelton had worked for the NSA as a communications specialist. He knew about highly classified American collection programs, but by 1979, he had left the agency under severe financial pressure. On January 14, 1980, he telephoned the Soviet embassy and offered to sell secrets. The call itself was captured by American surveillance, but investigators did not immediately identify the man behind the voice. Pelton carried no suitcase of stolen documents. He did not need one. He had memory, access, and enough technical knowledge to explain what the United States had been doing. During meetings with Soviet intelligence, he disclosed sensitive collection programs, including the operation against undersea communications. The Soviets ultimately paid him about $35,000. Consider the imbalance. The United States had committed a nuclear submarine, specialized divers, custom engineering, intelligence analysts, and years of dangerous patrols. Pelton helped destroy that advantage for a sum smaller than the cost of many individual components aboard the tap. Moscow did not immediately rush to the cable. Removing the device too quickly could warn the Americans that the program had been betrayed. Soviet intelligence had every reason to control the timing, study the operation, and protect the source that had revealed it. In 1981, American surveillance detected Soviet ships, including a salvage vessel, operating near the tap site. When USS Parch later returned, the cable was still there. The recorder was gone. Imagine the images arriving inside the submarine. Familiar seabed, familiar line, then an empty space where tons of American machinery should have been. There was no accusation and no diplomatic protest. The absence was the message. The Soviets had recovered the tap. From that moment, American officials had to assume more than the loss of the recordings. Moscow could examine the device, learn how it collected signals, and infer what American submarines were capable of doing near the seabed. A secret intelligence source had become a Soviet counterintelligence trophy. The betrayer remained unidentified for years. Then, in 1985, KGB officer Vitaly Yurchenko defected to the United States. He could not initially provide Pelton's name, but his information helped investigators narrow the search to a former NSA employee. The FBI compared personnel records and other evidence until the old embassy recording became useful again. Pelton's voice linked him to the call. Faced with the evidence, he confessed. In 1986, a federal court convicted him of espionage. He received 3 concurrent life sentences, plus 10 years. The sentence punished the spy. It could not restore the years of access he had sold. The recovered Ivy Bell's device was later displayed in Moscow. It looked less like a traditional spy gadget than a piece of industrial machinery. That was the point. This operation had required far more than hidden cameras and coded meetings. It required a submarine redesigned for the ocean floor, divers willing to work beyond easy rescue, engineers solving problems with no existing manual, and crews trained to carry their achievement in silence. Yet its collapse came from the oldest vulnerability in espionage: a human being. Ivy Bell's matters today because the physical network beneath the oceans has become vastly more important. Modern submarine cables use fiber rather than the copper systems of the Cold War. But they still rest on the seabed and still emerge at known landing sites. According to the International Telecommunication Union, they carry more than 99% of intercontinental data traffic. Bank transfers, military logistics, government communications, cloud services, video calls, and live broadcasts all depend on thin strands of glass crossing dark water. The technology protecting them has advanced. So has the technology that can approach them. Specialized submarines, remotely operated vehicles, autonomous systems, and seabed sensors can inspect places that were nearly unreachable when Halibut entered the Sea of Okhotsk. The danger is not limited to cutting a cable. A line can be mapped. Its landing infrastructure can be studied. Sensors can be placed nearby. Repairs can be delayed. Damage can be disguised as an accident. In deep water, evidence is difficult to recover and responsibility is difficult to prove. That uncertainty gives adversaries room to act while governments argue over attribution. Operation Ivy Bells did not succeed because the Americans defeated every Soviet defense. It succeeded because they found one assumption holding those defenses together: no enemy submarine could reach the cable. It failed because the Americans made another assumption: a man trusted with the secret would continue to protect it. Both assumptions were wrong. The Cold War cable in the Sea of Okhotsk is no longer the center of a superpower intelligence contest. But the method survives. Search for the infrastructure everyone depends on. Identify the protection people take for granted. Then attack the assumption beneath it. So when a message crosses an ocean in less than a second, remember the route it takes. It does not vanish into a wireless cloud. It travels through glass lying in cold darkness, beyond public view, but never beyond strategic interest. What do you think is the greater threat to today's undersea cables? Sabotage, secret interception, or betrayal from inside the organizations that protect them? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to The Modern Ledger and continue with our next Cold War file, because the documents may be sealed, but the ledger never forgets.